Okay, so thank you. Now we can start. Elio, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fernando. It'll be a pleasure to have you here again today. And this is our third day of our bootcamp week in CCBC. For those who doesn't know CCBC, CCBC is a chamber of commerce between Brazil and Canada with more than 50 years. And we have this commission that myself and Marcelo are the coordinators, that is tech committee. This tech committee, we promote several actions during the year, such as webinars and meetings. And for those who doesn't take part on that, it would be a pleasure to have you with us. In this initiative of our bootcamp this week, we have the support of some companies and institutions here in Brazil, basically ABS, Associação Brasileira de Empresas de Software, PIT, São José dos Campos, o Parque de Inovação e Tecnologia de São José dos Campos, também o IPT, o Instituto de Pesquisas Tecnológicas do Estado de São Paulo, a Universidade Fivale, junto com o Fivale Tech Park, e também o Sebrae para startups. We thank you all of these supporters that support us to have this meeting today. Saying that, I will call Layial El-Hadi. It will be a pleasure to have you here, Layial. And she gonna talk a little bit about her experience and all the work that FinTech Cadence do in Canada. So everybody might participate by the end of her presentation. So we encourage you to take notes or prepare your questions. If you are not comfortable with the language, do it in Portuguese on our chat that we gonna help you. So, Layial, thank you very much again for being here with us to talk about your experience and fintech ecosystems in Canada. That is really important for us, considering that Brazil as well has a huge ecosystem for fintechs.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to speak to different countries about what they're doing in fintech. So I'll do an official introduction. I'll share my screen in a second, but I am really very happy to be here. I'm going to pretend that I can kind of speak Portuguese, but I really can't. I'm hoping the French and the Spanish might help a little bit. So yes, as Marcelo said, if you guys do have questions as I'm presenting, please don't hesitate to put them on the chat. I'll do my best to speak slowly because I also have a Canadian accent and we often mumble and speak very quickly. So if I'm talking too fast, you guys can just slow me down to go through the stuff better and so that you can get value from it. So I'll get started, but before I get into it a little bit, I know a lot of you guys have your cameras off, but if you want to turn your cameras on, if you're doing it, not doing anything that you don't want anyone to see, please feel free to do that. It'll make it a little bit more dynamic and we can have a bit more of a heart-to-heart conversation as we go through what can only be seen as one of the most exciting sectors, fintech. As Fernando said, and as Helio introduced me, I'll be going over what the Canadian fintech landscape looks like. I want to preface this by saying, we're very proud of what we've done in Canada here around fintech, and we have a lot of opportunities that are coming up forward. But I do recognize that I'm speaking to Brazilians, and I do want to say that, in Canada, we really look at Brazil as a forward thinker in terms of fintech. There are so many things that you guys have done that we look at as case studies from your real-time rails all the way through to the way you include that you take into account fintech inclusion as well as you're developing your product. So I will present what the Canadian landscape looks like for your information. But when we open it up to questions and when we're having conversations, please do also share what you've seen is happening and works in Brazil, because oftentimes we often use your country anyways as a best case practice. So far, so good?
Perfect.
Okay, amazing. So I'll keep going. As was introduced, just in case you didn't catch it, my name is Layial El-Hadi. I'm the Executive Director of FinTech Cadence. In more details, what I want to cover with you guys today is an overview of how we've seen FinTech in Canada, how the landscape has evolved. I'll start by introducing FinTech Cadence as well, just so that you guys have a good idea of who we are as an organization and why I'm even here talking to you guys today. And then I'll give you a bit more information about how the Canadian perspective and landscape has evolved, who the stakeholders are in this ecosystem, the technologies that we've utilized and leveraged here. And then, of course, we'll keep it open for questions and discussions around opportunities for collaborations and any closing thoughts and takeaways. Does that sound good for everyone?
Really
Perfect.
good.
Yeah, amazing, Helio. Anderson, I feel sorry for you. The only one I see your camera on, so I might come to you more for the Q&A. But if you guys are listening and still engaged, if you guys can just give me the thumbs up just to make sure everyone's comfortable with the agenda. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Leandro. Wonderful. Okay, perfect. So then let me start introducing who we are as an organization. As I said earlier, we're called FinTech Cadence, and we started about 8.5 years ago in Montreal, in Canada. And the idea of why we started was we saw that there was a lot of opportunities that were happening around the technology space, innovation, and entrepreneurship. But there really wasn't any organization or entity that was focused on the FinTech landscape. And I'll explain to you why this was important to us in the beginning and how it's helped evolve the FinTech landscape. So our founder at the time had seen that there was a lot of conversation around why is innovation important? Why do we need to encourage entrepreneurship? And then we saw that there was a lot of conversations happening in the same way with financial institutions. And so we tried to bridge that gap between conversation on innovation is great, but let's look at what financial institutions are doing and how can we build that gap together. And as we started to really make sure that the financial system was advancing to serve all Canadians for the better. So the focus that we had, and I think this is really the DNA of FinTech across Canada, is how can FinTech help Canadians for the better versus how do we help amplify or increase profit for financial institutions and businesses? That's not the bottom line. The bottom line is to give a diversity of products and availability for Canadian consumers and small businesses alike. And so we started with three main focuses as an organization and continue to work on those three. The first one is around education. There's a lot of content in FinTech that can sometimes become overwhelming, whether it's blockchain technologies or asset management or you name it. So we've developed a FinTech program that's actually done virtually. So if any of you guys are interested in ever taking it, I'll speak to Fernando and Helio and see if we can do a special collaboration on it. It's a virtual program, and we go through and we have industry teach the program specifically. So we really are focused on our organization and how do we leverage what industry is doing and make sure they're the ones who are teaching whatever component and element we have included into the curriculum. We also work with universities across Canada on research commercialization. What we've seen, and I'll be interested to hear if it's similar in Brazil, but what we've seen is that there's a lot of research that's being developed from psychology to consumer behavior that's being developed on a university level that can actually really help, one, fintechs that are already in the market, but there might be ideas there as well for consumers and commercialization opportunities. So we're trying to be that bridge between what's happening in academia and as well what we can implement on the ground for industry. And lastly, we work directly with financial institutions in order to ensure that they are understanding what's happening on, I'll call it the ground level, but on the market when it comes to fintechs, and that they also have an opportunity to connect with them, whether it's through partnerships or collaboration. And I'll tell you why this is really important for the fintech landscape, because one, and we'll get into it in more details, but Canada has a collaboration problem in that if you want to develop as a fintech, if you want to scale as a fintech, especially in the earlier days, you need some form of a relationship with a financial institution. You need either it be sales, it be partnership, it be an acquisition strategy or an exit strategy. And the reason for that is consumer interactions is highly protected by regulations in Canada, and banks are very protective of consumers as well. Canada has a very different landscape than the United States, where we have a very limited number of financial institutions that operate as banks here in Canada. We have about 8 big ones. We often talk about the top 5. And if you're hanging out with the 6th, 7th, or 8th bank, they'll also tell you, the top 6 or the top 7. So very different than what you would see comparatively in the United States, where there's hundreds of banks and consumers have an incredible diversity of financial institutions to work with. In Canada, it's very, very limited. And that's created a highly competitive landscape. I won't get into the politics around that. If you're ever interested, you can look up some politics around Canadian banks and consumer options. But what I will say is it has created, from an innovation standpoint and a fintech standpoint, it's created a smaller market to operate and play in, and has put a lot of limitations on how fintechs can grow without that relationship with a financial institution. And so that's why when we say we work very closely with financial institutions, it's really a big deal, because it's hard in Canada to develop a fintech startup, ecosystem, partnership, whatever you name it, without them in the conversation as well. I won't go into too much detail here, but if you are interested in any programs that we have, 99% of the programs that we deliver are virtual. So if you're ever interested, please check out our programs online so you can see a bit more. And if you're interested in any of them, then Helio and Fernando can coordinate introductions to me, and I'm definitely happy to give you guys more information about how to do that. If you are a founder or are interested in a startup and want to come into Canada, then please do reach out to us. We are a nonprofit organization, and we also don't take shares, and we don't charge startups anything for our programs. So that's just something for you to keep in mind if you're ever interested in the programs. The other thing we do is, of course, a lot of events. I'll talk about why events are really important in the development of the fintech landscape later on. But again, if you're ever in Canada, our events are not virtual, unfortunately. But if you're ever in Canada and are looking for a great way to interact with the fintech ecosystem, then I highly recommend you check out our events there as well. Now, this is kind of a bit of an idea of how we've seen the fintech journey go through, and it's a little bit ironic to show a very linear process for a founder, an entrepreneur, or a startup, because we all know, I think everyone on this call knows, nothing is linear in this ecosystem or in this sector. But as linear as it can get when it helps us to understand how do we support fintechs through and through, we've seen that at large, the first step that we really need to do and engage with is awareness around fintech. People might have expertise in technology, might have expertise in business, might have expertise in the financial sector. So our job is to really pick on those individuals and create an awareness of why they need to come into the fintech landscape. And again, I'll explain why that's important later on. Then we really try and create opportunities around engagement, helping them build the startups, incubating them, and then, of course, giving them the opportunity to accelerate and grow as well throughout the ecosystem. And you'll see here as well how each of our programs support all of these process and paths. So far, so good?
Yes.
Amazing. So if there is anything, like I said earlier on, and before the chat ends, I'll also put my email so you guys can email me directly. But if you guys see anything here that you want a bit more information on, you can email me at any point. And if you're interested in anything that we're doing as an organization or what's happening in the fintech ecosystem, then follow us on LinkedIn. We're incredibly robust in terms of what's happening in the landscape, as well as sharing a lot of our partners and events as well there too. So make sure you're following us if you're interested in hearing more about the work that we are doing as an organization. Well, let's get into a little bit of the introduction of fintech. Now, I was really hesitant about starting this whole presentation with, well, what is fintech? But I think what's important here is I want you guys to see what is fintech for the Canadian ecosystem, because it has developed quite differently. I imagine in Brazil it's developed in a different way than it did in Canada, the same way that I think fintech has developed in Kenya and Nigeria much differently than it did in Canada or in Singapore or China, much, much differently. For us here in Canada, fintech really took a leap towards the end of the financial crisis in 2008. Now, while Canada very luckily was not impacted heavily by the financial crisis, 99% mostly due to our regulatory landscape and different mentalities in the financial system and government, there is still the ricochet effect of what happens in the United States oftentimes hits us here in Canada. And so we started seeing a lot of individuals who understood the financial services, who were being laid off because of the financial crisis, start developing new fintech companies and solutions, because that's what we do as humans sometimes, is we make our own opportunities in our own ways, and that's kind of what the entrepreneurs were doing at that time. However, then in Canada, what we started seeing was that a lot of people were excited by, well, let's see what we can do and how we can integrate technology into finance. So very simply and very easily defined there. And a lot of that was put on to the financial institutions. So you'll see here that Canada really looked at the innovation was supposed to be coming from the financial institutions, from our banks, from our insurance firms. And that's kind of where we started to see that happen for consumers. I'll say now, fast forward to 2025, our innovation in finance is not only dependent on our financial institutions. We look at it from agriculture, your insurance, financial, your medical. We're expecting fintech integration as well. You'll see that in our businesses. So fintech has really, and people's understanding of fintech has really gone past, okay, how do we technologize or innovate on the products that are being available and offered by financial institutions, and more so through all of the services that we interact with as consumers and small businesses. How do we see financial innovation happen within those specifically as well? And like I was saying earlier, we really started to see in Canada the wave growth starting around 2008, 2009, following the financial crisis, and really kind of escalate and speed up towards 2015 all the way through 2018. And if we look at the historical waves of how fintech kind of came through, we look at, and we often say in Canada, we in Canada are in about wave 3.0 of how fintech has evolved and developed. And the thing that we're really excited to see, or keeping our eye out here in Canada, is, well, what does fintech wave 4 really look like? Is that where technological firms are going to come in and really shake the Canadian fintech landscape by offering financial solutions through their apps? And again, this is very different than in other jurisdictions, because Canada, again, is very protected with its regulations around who can offer financial products. And so we're keeping an eye out on what does that evolution look like in Canada. When fintech was starting to really take off and consumers were starting to be offered different products, what we saw founders and entrepreneurs do is they unbundled the financial institution. And so you'll see here an example. I know Amazon is not Canadian, nor do we claim it. But what I do kind of want to show you is a lot of fintechs would see what a financial institution was offering and say, okay, well, we can't offer credit cards, mortgage offerings, checking accounts, savings account. We can't do all of that. But what we know we can do is provide consumers with an alternative way to save in a much better way than financial institutions are offering right now. And so we call that the unbundling of the financial institutions, or the unbundling of the bank, where a fintech would take one component or one element of a financial service and do that really, really well. Now, of course, it doesn't come as any surprise that when you unbundle something in order to grow, whether through revenue or consumers, you're going to start adding services. And so now what we're seeing 10 years later is the rebundling of financial institutions. So when we used to do this presentation 8 or so years ago, we used to say, well, we're seeing all our founders basically take a bank offering and say, we can offer a better credit card, or we can offer a better investment, as you would, if you've heard of Wealthsimple, or we can offer better trading. And then now we're seeing them say, well, we offer better trading. We have quite a number of consumers. What's the next level of scale and growth for us? Well, let's start offering them a credit card, or let's start offering them a different product as well. And so now you're seeing that in the Canadian landscape, a lot of the fintechs are focusing on offering multiple layers of products as well. So far, so good?
I think so.
Yeah, still with me? Not going too fast, I hope? I'll just check the chat. We're still good. Okay. And then, of course, as many countries experienced, we had a few innovation triggers that we call them that helped us speed up with fintech. So one, consumers started to become more comfortable with technology. Okay, we were using our phones every single day. We can now use mobile banking, for example, or we understand what mobile banking looks like. So we are comfortable with doing interact exchanges, exchanging money from one hand to another. So that was one big uptake of fintech that we saw. The next was because of all the pressure of entrepreneurs coming into the space and really trying to shake the ecosystem, we started to see more internal innovation happen. And then, of course, as is normal, we also started to see more technological developments happen, right? So now we're starting to see, now today it's a much different conversation around artificial intelligence, but 8 or 10 years ago, there was still artificial intelligence conversations happening, especially in Canada, mostly because we have what we call the grandfathers of artificial intelligence that are based in Montreal and the Toronto Tech Corridor. And so there was a lot more advancements happening around what kind of offerings can you offer, from biotech products all the way through to voice recognition. And then, of course, the mobile banking, as I mentioned earlier. And last but not least, another big trigger for why fintech was starting to uptake in Canada was consumer expectation. All of a sudden, if I can order food in an app, why can't I access and transfer money through an app? Or why can't I send money to my family back if we're not Canadian origins? Why can't I send it back to their country of origin through an application? Why can't I see what the investment rates look like through that? So other technological services that started to become more and more innovative put pressure on the financial sector as well.
Yo, you go to the gym?
And then here we go. This is where Canada really saw the willingness of the sector change a little bit when COVID happened. And fortunately, we know COVID was a very difficult time. From a technological development side of things, COVID really helped accelerated because now all of a sudden you couldn't exchange money in person. There were so many services that Canada's market was offering that couldn't be happening in person anymore. And so they needed they needed fintech solutions for that. An example was when the government was distributing financial checks to help Canadian consumers. They couldn't do that through their bank, so they had to work with fintechs to help them distribute those checks. So, and this is not unique to Canada, this particular component. I think it happened across the world, obviously, but it really did kind of speed up the way people spoke about how we can be more advanced in our financial services going forward. So what does the Canadian perspective look like specifically? And I'll just put a reminder that if you guys do have any questions, please do put them on the chat, and we will open up the floor in a little bit as well for questions. So make sure you're taking those down so we can go through and have all your questions addressed specifically. And so as I was saying, let's look at what does the Canadian perspective really look like and what do the numbers look like in terms of growth. The first thing we look at when we say, okay, well, are we doing healthy as a country in terms of fintech, is we look at what is the landscape in which fintechs can operate in. So I know I mentioned we had 8 banks earlier. Here you'll see 88 banks. This includes international bank offerings. It also includes branches, etc. So we have a relatively respectable financial banking system. We also have around 430 lending institutions, around 375 funds, which are really important for capital. We'll talk about that later, and about 110 insurance firms as well. So for all intents and purposes, we have a very robust financial landscape that innovation should be bursting through as a country. And so we see in Canada that we have about 1,800 to 2,500 fintechs that operate across the country. I don't know if that would surprise you or not surprise you, but that's the number that we have. If you're familiar with what the Canadian economic market looks like, it will come as no surprise that Ontario houses about 50% of those fintechs. We have Toronto, which is not the capital of Canada, but the economic capital of Canada for all intents and purposes, as well as a very robust technology corridor that's in the Ontario province as well, followed by Quebec and British Columbia. So those are the provinces that see the most fintech startups going that are developing. And again, for those who are familiar with Canada economics distribution, it will match the financial sector very, very closely as well. What you don't see here, and what I'll bring up in the next slide, is that Alberta is one of the provinces that's really making waves and one of the fastest growing innovation markets in Canada. They're a province that is known for its investment in oil and gas. And because of the finite limitations or the limitations of oil and gas, are really looking at diversifying their economy and have done so by pushing a lot of innovation forward. And one of the sectors that they really want to be seen as strong in is fintech. So they're also going to be developing, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 5-10 years when I'm doing this presentation, hopefully we're still doing this presentation, that you'd see Alberta take over either Quebec or British Columbia. Will come as no surprise for me there. But it's also really important as we going through and presenting this, you'll see that I'm breaking down the number of fintechs by province, and this should kind of show you one of the DNAs of our country is that we are also very provincially focused, right? We report through provinces, we develop through provinces. This is not a negative nor a positive. It's just to kind of show you the mentality of which our companies and the support systems around the development is reflective of our internal culture of what's happening in a specific province versus what's not happening in a specific province. From there, you'll see, for those of you who are familiar with the cities here in Canada, the Toronto, like I said earlier, houses the highest number of fintechs because our financial sector is the biggest in Toronto, followed by Montreal, Vancouver, and as I said, Calgary as well. Within that, and we'll get into the sectors in a second, but within that, you'll see the following sectors are the ones that are really strong and established in Canada, as well as the ones that are growing in terms of the number of fintechs that we're developing. So payments is one of the areas that the fintech landscape, the fintech Canadian ecosystem is growing in, and one of our traditionally most strong ones. This shouldn't be surprising for anyone who knows a little bit about our financial sector, because when it comes to our payment systems, we have been in the past, and I will say this historically, we have been one of the strongest countries. We've had solutions that really support the payment system through innovative models, whether it's our payment systems in person, whether it's our Interact email exchange between consumers, or our financial banks payment system lending. Now, those are just a few examples, but there's numerous amounts. But why do I say it historically? Because we're starting to run up across a lot of limitations. One, we do not have real-time rails in Canada. We were supposed to have it X number of years ago, and every year it develops and gets pushed back. Hopefully, we're going to start seeing a real-time rail system and payment system take a shape by the end of 2026. But as you guys know, and as I said in the beginning of my presentation, Brazil is an example we look at because Brazil has, I think, implemented real-time rails if it wasn't 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll have somebody on the chat with me.
Yeah, it
around
is true.
5 years ago.
It is true, yes.
So you see that while Canada had payment solutions that were great for its consumers at the time, it hasn't kept up with developing new innovations around that. And I use those examples very clearly because oftentimes people say, well, Canada, we're ahead. We have Interact email exchange. And then you'll say, okay, well, in other countries, you don't have to email somebody money to transfer the funds. You can tap your phone to do that. You have shared apps that can transfer that. So there's so many solutions globally that are leaps and bounds ahead of what we're doing here in Canada. And I think something that's very emblematic of Canadian culture, of which we have a solution that works, that worked well, that was used as an example maybe 5-10 years ago. And we think that's good enough going forward, which is not going to be good enough. And then you'll see. Yes, of course.
I think we have a good question from Patricia in the chat. If you can answer her, it will be good.
Perfect. So Patricia, thank you for your question, which goes, I'm an HR professional who worked for Questrated Toronto FinTech for about 3 years. Very cool. As you mentioned, most financial companies are based in Toronto, but I've recently seen some new fintechs emerging in Alberta. Aside from the tax incentives are there other provinces offering similar benefits to attract new fintech companies? Absolutely. So let's go through. So Patricia, I'm going to do this segment first, and then we're going to go back to the map. So that way you can see what this complemented with the geographic expansion looks like. And I think you'll see how things are going. So is that good, Marcel?
Perfect.
Okay, amazing. So when we're looking at how do we develop each of these components, so when we look and see, well, what makes a financial or fintech, sector healthy? In Canada, this is kind of the variables that we look at when we're developing that formula. So the first is financial institutions. I've already spoken about this earlier. We'll come back to it in a bit, but no need to go through that too much. The second component, part of the formula, is we need talent. Now, Canada has an incredible amount of talent in it. We have Montreal, for example, has second highest number of universities than Boston in North America. We have talent around artificial intelligence, technology, like I said, again, very strong financial sector. So we have individuals who understand what the financial sector looks like, both from legacy systems and the back end, which is a big thing. So we're not short of talent. The next thing is to have support organizations such as FinTech Cadence, as well as government buy-in around why this sector is really important and should be one of the big ones in Canada. Then we get into capital, and that means venture capital investment, angel investment, government investment. That I'll put an asterisk. We'll talk about it in a second. And then last but not least, we talk about access to technology, whether it's service systems, all the way through the artificial intelligence, quantum computing as well, that we talked about, of which Canada is incredibly strong in. So if we look at it as a formula and we look at all of these variables, we see, okay, Canada should be able to succeed, should also have a high number of fintechs that are developing, and should also be providing innovative solutions that globally, the world is looking at and using as comparative as best case practices. But that's not often the case, and we'll talk about why that is. So now thinking of keeping this in mind, and going back to Patricia's question, we look and say, okay, so Alberta has identified and seen that fintech should be one of its strong sectors. So it will incentivize fintechs. So yes, there's one, a tax incentive, but two, Patricia, there's also a huge HR incentive. So if you are a founder and you move your business to Alberta, you can get funding for your salary, you can get funding for your team's salary, etc. You have to there's stringent rules around it, though. You can't just move one of your staff there. It has to be X% number of a staff there, etc. So Alberta is doing a lot of things that are helping startups move from other provinces there. Now, because we work with, I didn't say this earlier, sorry, but since we opened in Montreal, we also have offices in Toronto, Calgary, the Atlantic, and more futuristically in Vancouver. We see what the governments are doing in each of those provinces. And while all of them are excited by fintech is not a priority for every single government. You'll see in the Atlantic, for example, there is more focus on not agriculture, what do we call it? Marine technology. See more focus on educational technology. Cybersecurity is huge in the Atlantic, but not necessarily cybersecurity tied with fintech. And so you'll see some of the companies are moving out of the Atlantic, some of the fintech companies, are moving out of the Atlantic to Toronto, because then they have access to financial institutions. So even though it's not an incentive the way Alberta has it, it gives them a much bigger network. It gives them peer-to-peer support, and it gives them access to way more financial institution decision makers than they would have if they stayed in the Atlantic. So yeah, we have RBC in the Atlantic, but RBC, when we go talk to them, they need to talk to their Toronto office to be able to make a decision. So we moved to Toronto, cut out the middleman, and now we can talk directly to RBC. One very small example. The provinces, because Patricia, you're familiar with the provinces here. The provinces we don't see too much happening in fintech is Saskatchewan, which is my home province, and Manitoba. I think between the two of them, there's 5 fintech startups, and that's being very generous of how we're defining fintech. But we just want to make sure we're in the map there as well. And then again, that's not surprising, nor is it a negative thing. What Saskatchewan and Manitoba are very strong at is agricultural tech. So you see that they're really matching what their economy looks like and what they can offer and what they can advance there as well. So they are incentivizing, I believe, to be the right sector. But as I also said earlier, now we're so linear with how we're thinking. Okay, there's ag tech, there's ed tech, there's fintech. But in the future, I don't think these sectorial divisions really matter. You will have a fintech or you'll have a payment system in your agricultural product. So does that make you an ag tech or does it make you a fintech? As you're developing educational technology or medical products, there might be a payment system that now all of a sudden you're integrating a fintech into your solution. So I say this divisionally now, but in the future, this could be a much different conversation. So I hope that answers your question, Patricia. Yeah, okay, I saw the thumbs up, which is great. Okay, so I know we're kind of quite a lot of stuff being dumped on you guys, but I'll just quickly go through a few other components and then I'll open it up for other questions. And again, as a reminder, just throw them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. So you'll see here that in venture capital, and we often use venture capital as the bigger pool because they have a bigger pool, financial pool than, let's say, angel investors. But I will talk about all of the different versions of investments that we get. You'll see in Canada in 2021, which we'll say 2021 and 2022 were the peak of capital investments in fintech in Canada. So there's about 6.4 billion that was invested in 2021. In comparison, KPMG has identified that I think it was 1.3, no, excuse me, I have my notes here, 1.5 billion was invested in fintech. So we see a decrease in the amount of investments that fintechs are going through. Now, Canada has a bit of I'm going to choose this word carefully, like a big brother, younger brother relationship with the United States. And so as we're looking at the capital that we have in Canada, we often speak about it in a negative way because it's often looked at as we don't have as much capital as the United States. Investments aren't as big. The amounts of investments aren't as big in Canada as they are in the US. And frankly, money moves a lot faster in the US. Again, I'm not here to make any positive or negative comments around this. What I will say is that we've seen that to be true. We've seen that venture capital in the United States is very aggressive. We often see Canadian companies try and raise funding in Canada, not be able to do so for 1 or 2 years, move into the States, and within 3 months have closed a US investment deal, which again is not what we want to see when we're trying to encourage a sector develop. And so capital has become a very big conversation in how Canadians are developing fintech solutions and the number of fintech solutions that we see. We are not seeing a growth in the number of fintech solutions. We're seeing a growth in established fintechs that we're seeing. So you'll see Wealthsimple develop more, Kobo. You'll see Shopify, Lightspeed. These are the big ones of which we'll talk about. You'll see those are growing quite rapidly, but we're seeing a decreased number in new fintechs come up in Canada, which does not match what's happening globally. So again, another flag that we raised there. A big part of that is regulations and our regulatory limitations. And another big factor is around how conservative capital is in Canada. Venture capital, so private funding, angel investors as well as government funding. So that's a big element that we have to consider when we are comparing and seeing how the fintech landscape is evolving in Canada. I put a very quick case study here. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of Mocha before.
I'm not.
Okay. So I won't spend too much time here. I just wanted to give you an example, a real life example of how a fintech develops when it comes to capital raising. Mocha is a product that started out of Montreal, actually out of Concordia University, and the founder, Phil Brar, realized that millennials were not actually saving money, and they found saving systems very overwhelming and complex. And so what he designed was a solution that would help millennials save without thinking too much about it. And so when you would go to a store or cafe or a restaurant and use your card, it would round it up to the nearest dollar, take the difference, and save that for consumers. So if I go to Starbucks, I spend $3.50, it would round it up to $4, take the 50 cents and save it. For all intents and purposes, a very seamless solution for consumers to help them with their savings. And so you'll see that when he first started, and this is very reflective of how most fintechs start. And so I thought it would be a great case study for here, or at least a great dialogue for all of us here on the call. He started around 2016 with an idea, approached one of the venture private funders, which is First Capital Partners, was able to raise funding from it because of the way he pitched and his experience, etc. Then with the $500,000 that was invested in him, he started building the product. By May 2017, with a product that's tested and consumers that have seen success, First Capital Partner comes in and gives them another pre-seed of $750,000. Now I'll just pause here because I just want to highlight that. Well, first, are we all comfortable with capital raising from seed, Series A, Series B? Are we comfortable with those tiers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So if we're comfortable, if you have any questions about them, I'm definitely happy to give you a breakdown later on. But all intents and purposes, what you'll see here is a pre-seed at 750 in comparison to a US company. That would be within the 2 million already. So we're already starting to see that Canada's being like investment that's coming into Canadian companies is much lower than American ones. Then you see, with an acquisition for a specific particular licensing, which we don't have to get into here, then the development and entry into market. So we see Desjardins, one of the big banks in Canada, invest a $2 million seed, and then National Bank and Desjardins, as well as other investors, invested a $10 million Series A fund. And then in May 2021, Mogu, a Vancouver-based company, acquired Mocha, and there was an exit from their founder there as well. So a very common trajectory and journey for fintechs. Right now, I believe we only have three unicorns, a company that's valued over $1 billion in the fintech space. But please don't hold me to that. I know that there's three that's often talked about: Wealthsimple, Shopify, as well as Verifin too. All big fintech unicorns that have come out of the Canadian market, which is, again, in comparison to what's happening globally, not the biggest number, and we can definitely do more in Canada. So some of the big fintechs that you might or might not have heard of is Neo Financial out of Alberta, Flinks, which is an API aggregator. That while you might not have heard of Flinks, if you use any other fintech product in Canada, most likely you're using Flinks or a comparative company called Plaid that's out of the United States as an API aggregator on the back end. Wealthsimple is one of the biggest fintechs I think that most people are familiar with. One, because it has a very visible business to consumer strategy, but two, because they've done incredibly well. Now, what I will say, if you guys remember earlier, what I was saying about the rebundling of the banks today, actually, they just finished their presentation an hour and 16 minutes ago. They just announced that they will be launching credit cards as well. So we see Wealthsimple continue to grow and continue to take on and become challenger banks, which I think is starting to shift a little bit of how financial institutions are starting to see the seriousness of fintechs challenging their market too. Lightspeed is a point of sales system. Verifin was acquired, and that one of the big unicorns as well. And Shopify, which is a e-commerce website. Again, I think most people know about Shopify, so I'll just stop there. So you can see that we're able to develop and build big fintechs in Canada, and quite a lot of them, I think, are going to be doing quite well as we go through. And now what we want to see is more of these good case studies happening. And so I'll leave in this kind of section here a little bit with around future predictions. So we see some of the top 5 verticals that will continue to grow in Canada is paytechs, insurance, and innovation around insurance, and then lending, as well as personal finance management. And that's because consumer needs are quite a lot here in the Canadian market for those of you guys who live here. So there's quite a lot of things that can be offered for the Canadian market. And then things to keep an eye out on that Canada is really trying to push forward. One is prop tech, and that's property technology integrated with fintech. So property management, lending, or rental payments, et cetera, will all fall under prop tech. We have a big problem with housing in Canada right now. And so we're really trying to see, can fintech play a big role in helping Canadian needs and address Canadian needs around housing. Neobanks. So neobanks is I'm starting not rebundling or unbundling a bank. I'm starting as a bank and a digital technological focused bank. So we're trying to see if are we going to start seeing more of these companies come through. Digital currencies and assets. Canada has been both pro and con around that, and we'll touch on it a little bit later on, but we're seeing that grow in Canada. Data-driven finance, I think that parallels a lot of what's happening globally, and then reg tech as well. And some of the things that we're really hoping to see in Canada that will help push the way the fintech landscape develops is one is open banking. And this is something that I want to touch on when it comes to regulations, but Canada does not have an open banking framework or regulatory framework around open banking, which has incredibly limited the amounts and the number of fintechs that are developing and how they can leverage data for consumers to build new and innovative products. Here, we really look at the United States and Australia, who have very similar regulatory frameworks as Canada does, as a good case study, not a perfect study, but as a good case study that we can follow through. We have so many beachhead markets that we haven't even tapped into in the Canadian market that globally have very, very solutions for their consumers. So that's one area as well that we can kind of start seeing that happen. Collaborations, I mentioned earlier that there is always a need for a relationship between financial institutions and fintechs, but we're also starting to see collaboration amongst different fintechs and different institutions around that. So there's quite a lot of opportunity there. And last but not least, of course, is technical enhancements. The way technology is developing now with quantum computing and artificial intelligence is a much different conversation than it was 5 years ago. So quite a lot that's going to be happening in that space as well. Okay, maybe I'll pause here and see if there's any other questions. I know I'm just keeping my eye out on time.
Yeah, I didn't see any new question here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there are no questions, then I'll just continue on to the next segment around regulations. So I mentioned earlier that regulations is quite a tough thing for Canada. Canada has a fragmented regulatory system. In that, if you're building a product in Quebec, you might have to do different regulatory compliance or implementation if you're then going to expand into Ontario or to a different province, Alberta or British Columbia. So if you're building a company and now you have different regulations that you have to implement, it starts to become very, very costly for you as a business. Not only is it also costly going province to province and expanding your market, your product across the rest of Canada, but there's also regulatory jurisdictions that are different from municipal, so provincial to federal. And so we see that there's quite a lot of challenges and costs that are associated with regulatory compliance for Canadian fintechs that limits, one, the number of fintechs that are created, and two, the amount of capital that fintechs need in the earlier days. Then definition and scope really does differ. The way some people understand digital currencies or blockchain technologies or those different components differ by province as well. And so there's now a big need for regulatory bodies to start to understand, okay, well, what is under our scope? What are we as a regulator responsible for? And once we've identified that, how do we work closely with with fintechs to help them understand what that scope looks like? And then I'll end on this challenge, which is regulators in Canada are notoriously not fast around adhering to new technology. So again, all the 3 points that you see on the challenging sides create a very costly landscape for fintechs to be able to operate in. I see there's a question from Patricia, so I'll go into that one again while we just take a pause. We see many retailers like Canadian Tire and Loblaws offering credit cards and other financial products. Can these companies be considered fintechs? So again, Patricia, we have quite a back and forth around what that looks like. Right now, as of today, the way we look at it is if your primary product is not a fintech, you are not classified as a fintech. If you offer fintech services, so a credit card or any other insurance around your product, you are a retailer that offers fintech products. Because if you want to look at it, one other example we give is Starbucks. Starbucks has one of the biggest points and reward system and fintech on its back end than most of the companies we talk about when we talk about fintech, and yet it's not classified as a fintech. But it's developed quite a strong fintech product in its value and service offerings, but its predominant product is not that particular service. So as of today, we don't define it as a fintech, but hit me up in 5 years and I'll tell you if Canadian Tire is a fintech or not. Okay, perfect. Great. So then let's continue on with the regulations, and I'll just end here around the opportunities. I had to make sure that there was more opportunities than challenges. As a Canadian, I had to make sure there's more positive than negative. But one, I've been a bit cynical about what regulations has done for the innovation ecosystem, but in all intents and purposes, regulations is not bad. And actually, a lot of the things that we've seen, especially in the Canadian regulatory landscape and strategy and policies, is that because of our regulators, there's high consumer trust in our financial institutions. And that says a lot. The other thing is because we have a lot of regulations, there's a lot of opportunities to innovate on the regulatory side of things, compliance, KYC, know your customer side of things as well. 3, while regulators maybe don't move fast, I don't think there's a single regulatory body that's not interested in understanding how fintech develops and how they can encourage fintech. What they are is hesitant at the speed of which that should happen. And that's really the problem, not whether it should happen or not. 4, and this is something as well Brazil is incredibly strong at, is financial inclusion and making sure that all the different segments of the Canadians are actually being offered fair and valuable products for them. And then I'll end with this opportunity that because there's so much potential, it means there's a huge amount of opportunity. But I did put if willing, and that really is around if regulators are willing to go at the speed and with the fintechs versus potentially financial institutions, which usually are more interested in their bottom line. And then the other side of things, and I've mentioned real-time rails a few times now, but we don't have open banking framework. We don't have a real-time rail frame implementation yet. So those 2 things are really hindering the number of fintechs that we're seeing and the way fintech entrepreneurs and even more established fintechs look at our regulatory landscape here in Canada. And I think this is something that if we don't figure out in the next 3-5 years, and even that is giving a lot of grace and time, is going to be a big problem for Canadian and innovation in the financial space in Canada. Okay. I'm a bit cognizant of time, Helio and Fernando. So do you want me to continue? Sorry to kind of bring everyone in, or do we open it up more for questions? I see Anderson has a question as well.
Yep.
Is that around
In
blockchain?
Portuguese. It's in Portuguese, yes. It's around blockchain.
I tried to read the one English word and said, okay, I understand blockchain crypto.
I'll try my English. When you
Okay,
mention about blockchain,
Mhm.
is it you are talking about cryptos, or it could be used for any other application in your fintech?
For us, it can be used as long as it's a crypto digital asset, or if it's smart contracts, for example, or logistic management, for example, as long as it's impacting a financial service. But that's for the definition of it. What we've seen happen in Canada around blockchain is there was a lot of openness for it maybe 10 years ago. Ethereum started here in Canada, very proudly so. And we've seen quite a lot of crypto come out of Canada. But with all the good, of course, there's bad. And you only need one bad player for the regulators to come in and tighten everything. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw, unfortunately, 3, 4 bad examples happen in Canada around crypto wallets, like stealing of the passcodes, etc. So there's quite a few examples that regulators then said, no, we're going to tighten this up. Cryptos are regulated on the security exchanges, so they're regulated on a provincial level, although the federal government, of course, has involvement. So we're seeing that a lot of the Canadian fintechs don't go into crypto as much as they used to in the past. The exception, of course, is in Alberta, because they have a much different approach to crypto and the opportunity. You can kind of see they're a province that's very gung-ho at provincial control, not federal control, as well as very open markets. Whereas you'll see Quebec as an alternative is very closed off to crypto. They have seen bad examples as well, so give and take what you see. But when I talk about blockchain specifically, we look at it from all the technology, not just the cryptocurrencies that come out of it. What we
Thank you.
don't,
Well,
yeah, of
Mhm.
course. Mhm.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, Anderson.
Might explore this point a little bit. It's really
Yeah.
interesting for me. And when you are talking about, this development of blockchain 10 years ago and now kind of get back. And the regulation is by state, is not a federal regulation, because in Brazil, 5 years ago, they almost criminalized use of cryptos here. But after that, federal government issued a law, and now is allowed. Is not entirely regulated, because BC should, promote some clarification, some specific regulations.
Mhm.
And when we are talking as well about not financial products, but about products that regarding let's come, can I say, products relating to, as SEC do in US, products relating to companies. We move to our similar to SEC here in Brazil, that's CVM, and CVM is really strict to allow use of crypto for this kind of market. So if you might clarify a little bit how
Mhm.
these ecosystems of agents of regulation in Canada would be great, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me clarify a few things. Well, one, I think the pro here that we look at is Canada was one of the first countries that regulated crypto exchanges under the anti-money laundering and anti-trade frauds. They did that through FINTRAC, which is a federal regulatory body. So that was the first time and one of the first countries that regulated crypto federally. However, any crypto trading must be registered with exchanges, which are provincial. So here again, you see the way the Canadian regulatory ecosystem works. Is that, yeah, so through FINTRAC, which is federally regulated, cryptos have to, our compliance has to follow their regulations. And then as they open a trading, they then have to regulate them. They then have to register with our security exchanges, which I believe is parallel to SEC in the US or the SEC in the US. I'm trying to think like SEC released the Franks and Dodds. That was on a federal level. We have something similar on a federal level, which I believe would be FinTrack then that did it. But the exchanges are provincially regulated there. So, yeah. There are a little bit of differences and nuances here. So, digital assets would be more federally looked at. CBDCs as well would be the Bank of Canada. If we look at blockchain from a digital identity voting side of, or Canadian voting or digital identity and digital data and consumers, that would be the framework is still being looked at, but that would be on a federal level. And then classifications is still a bit gray as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
But,
see that landscape is not very centralized.
Oh, yeah. That's but regarding CDBC, you are having projects in Canada regarding, because here in Brazil we are, in middle of pilot projects that BC are ruling, but we don't have a regulation and it's not allowed for the public use right now.
Same. We're exactly the same. We're still on pilot levels. I can send a few examples as well for you guys to look at, but we're still on a pilot level for CBDCs.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Just because I also see the time.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, just for time then, because actually I can keep going, right then, Fernando?
Yeah,
I think so.
We can keep going until 4, but we don't need to get there. But yeah, feel free to keep going.
Okay, I won't take up too much more of you guys' time. I just a few elements I want to make sure we address are the stakeholders and then technologies as well. So you'll see here in our stakeholders, if you're really interested in how the Canadian ecosystem looks like, then you really need to understand how these stakeholders work and how they work together. As you'll see, financial institutions, of which we've already spoken about, venture capital investors. So again, a lot of our fintechs are not revenue focused, but on investment focused, especially because of how heavy that capital is on the earlier days. The regulatory bodies, I gave the Autorité des marchés financiers, that's a Quebec provincial regulator, which has regulated a lot of the fintechs. And there's also insurance provincially regulated. So understanding the regulatory landscape is a big deal. Then we have your service providers, your legal, your support around there, incubators and accelerators, such as ourselves at FinTech Cadence, and community organizations. And last but not least, corporate labs. We used to see quite a lot of corporate labs 8 years ago focus on fintech, and now we see them less focused on a sector and more focused on technology. And so I think that's just kind of natural of how the development is going on that space. And then I'll touch very quickly on the technologies because I think it's also important for us to see how Canada has implemented some of these technologies. So you'll see here the way we look at fintech and what you can integrate into it is around these technologies that you see here. So blockchain we've spoken a little bit about. I'm happy to take any other questions on that, although I will start by saying I'm not a blockchain expert, so just so you're aware. Artificial intelligence, we've talked about that so much. I think there's a running joke in Canada where if you go to a fintech conference in Canada and they don't talk about agentic AI, then is it even a fintech conference anymore? So you'll see. And Marcelo, you're in the space, you're an expert in that space.
Yes, everyone just talk about that. Yeah, it's true.
Agentic AI, and if you don't, sorry to talk about the past, but 8 years ago, if you went and you weren't talking about robo-advisory or some basic components of AI, investors are like, oh, we're not interested. Then investors realized it wasn't actually artificial intelligence. So they're like, don't bring me any AI companies. And now investors are knocking on my door saying, hey, can you send me any agentic AI companies or any companies that are integrating it into their companies? And I'm like, okay, this jumping back and forth is very confusing. But,
it is true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say here, I know I said it earlier, I think Canada is doing some really cool things in that space. I mentioned quantum computing as well, but just a shout out to Quebec because, you know, they really are investing in quantum computing and they're starting to understand that it's going to have a lot of use cases. And they've done a big corridor around the development and testing of use cases of quantum computing here. I believe it's close to Sherbrooke there as well. Yeah, the collision, the last collision in Toronto was very focused around fintech and AI. Yeah, yeah, it was, and I think it kind of just shows where the global conversation is. Collision, while not as big as Web Summit, is very, you know, globally focused. So fintech was a big deal, yeah. And I think from what I've heard about Web Summit, I didn't go this year in Vancouver. It was all
Yeah.
about agentic AI too. I don't know if any of you guys went, but yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. Some of the other technologies that we here in Canada really focus on is big data, which again doesn't make that much shock. I think if you think of how we're really focusing on artificial intelligence development, and cybersecurity, that's a big thing for the things that we're doing as well. And because we don't have open banking, API and API aggregators are a big feature in the Canadian fintech landscape. Like I said, we mentioned Flinks. They do a lot of the API aggregation in the back end for a lot of our fintechs. And what I mean by that is because consumers can't give their data, even though it's their own data, their financial data, to other third-party products. The third-party products, in this case, fintechs, have to find a way to collect that data in some shape or form. And that's usually where API screen scrapers come in, and why it's been developed quite robustly in Canada. I know I want to touch a little bit about blockchain, but I think we talked about the regulatory landscape. We talked about how, you know, obviously our claim to fame is Ethereum, but there's also Dapper Labs out of Vancouver. There's BitBuy and CoinSquare, ChainSafe, a Toronto one, and Minerva AI also does have a few blockchain components as part of it too. So quite a lot there. While the regulatory landscape has tried to tamper on blockchain, it's more so on crypto and blockchain. We have seen that there is quite a lot of interest for consumers, and I think this would probably, Helio, this would probably match Brazilian consumers as well, where the understanding of it has increased, the desire to enter that market has increased. Of course, there's still a lot of skepticism around that, but because of that, you're seeing by nature in a capitalist society, you're going to see solutions being developed to address consumers' needs. And so it's not to say that Canada is limited in that. There's quite a lot of things that are happening, especially around cross-border money movement, stable coins. Those are really big here in Canada as well too.
One of pillars that BC says here in Brazil to develop this pilot regarding CBDC is regarding democratization of products for everybody, because a lot of people don't have access to huge funds and things like that. So they believe using this kind of technology, we might allow that everybody access these best products.
Financial services.
Financial services, yeah.
Yeah, and look, this is a little bit out of the blockchain conversation, but we'll lead into it. This is kind of what we've seen with fintech. Canadian consumers are incredibly loyal to their bank because historically their banks have been really good, and their financial, the economics of of the system has been very stable. Especially when we continue to hear horror stories happening globally, like the financial crisis or you name it. There's lots of examples you can give where there is no historical institutional sector that consumers can say, okay, we'll go through that. And actually, I wrote a few stats because I thought they were quite interesting. But around 71% of Canadians have a relationship with the first bank account that they opened. That's an incredibly high rate of consumer loyalty for your financial institution. It's not to say it's not the only product. You'll see a lot of Canadians have multiple products with various banks, but not as much as Canadians, and as Americans, and I don't think as much as Brazilians either, from what I've read. But we're very, very loyal because again, there's no reason for us not to trust our banks, and there's no reason for us not to go with our banks as a sector. But that's going to change. I think. Yeah, go ahead.
I would like just to hear from you about the level of banking population, because here in Brazil we have a lot of people that don't have access to the bank. So how is in Canada this ecosystem?
Yeah, it's very high. So it's very high, that fact that we have a very high banked population. So our unbanked rate is very low, but we have and not so positive, we don't say it's positive, is underbanked. So we don't look at it as, okay, do you have a financial institution or not? That we don't look at that as that number right now as in Canada. We looked at how underbanked our consumers are, and that we see is a number that's quite low. I don't have the number off the top of my head, Helio, but I'll get back to you. You can also look at the FCAC, which is the Financial Consumers, of course, because I'm on the spot, I forget the acronym, but the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, which is focused on the protection of Canadian consumers and financial inclusion. We work very closely with them, and they've released a very brilliant report around underbanked and underserved, underbanked, unbanked, and market serving financial institutions. So you'll see, for example, some new immigrants might not have access to services that they need. So Islamic financing. They can be banked in a second, but they might not have access to Islamic financing. You'll see as well in Indigenous communities, there's quite a lot of financial services and mistrust to financial services because historically they have shown very negative behavior towards these specific communities, or because of lack of technological infrastructure that's available in the north, so more of our Indigenous communities, there's less of the financial service speed and access and or cultural relationship with the financial institution. So we have quite a low number of underserved, we have quite a significant number of underserved population that we're working on trying to address right now.
And I think Paulo Petinga put here the website on the Canadian website with the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada here.
Thank you very much, Paulo. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in fintechs that are doing things around the financial health space, not to shout out Fintech Cadence too much, but there is, we do have a big portfolio of companies that are in financial inclusion. So I'll just quickly show you guys here, and I'll put the link on the website. But if you look at one of our programs, our Innovate Financial Health program, that one is focused on startups that are addressing consumer needs as well. And we also did a report around financial inclusion in the Canadian space as well. That one is a few years old. It's 4 years old for reports. I don't want to use that data. But if you're interested in what fintechs are that are specifically in that space, then I'll just put that on the chat for you guys very quickly.
Nice. Thank you for sharing this one.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. It's one of our big passions in Fintech Cadence, the financial inclusion. So I could speak for hours about it, but I'll spare you guys.
I can see you can inspire people here. You have a very good vibe, you know.
I hope so. And this is kind of this is kind of what I was saying earlier. So because we and I'll explain where I'm going with it, but because we have a strong relationship with our financial institutions, we haven't developed some of the products that are needed. So I usually give the examples of Kenya. I'm from Sudan originally, but I'll give the examples of Kenya and Nigeria, where we see, because there isn't a strong historical relationship with financial institutions, consumers had to depend on other technologies. So mobile banking, of course, mobile transfer, they're way ahead of what we do as in Canada. And that's where, again, blockchain and cryptocurrencies are now coming in. We see crypto being used in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We see it being used in various countries in Africa. We see it being used in Ecuador because it's an alternative solution to a relationship that isn't there with consumers. And so when we look at a Fintech Cadence, is what are all the technologies that are available to the underbanked, to the underserved, to Canadian consumers in general, if you want to look at it. But there's also, Canada is obviously various cultures. So there's a big wave of different cultures that are coming into Canada that now require different services that aren't available to them because the Canadian market wasn't built for them, right? I know I gave the example of Islamic financing, but another example we often give is, do you guys know what a Roscoe model is? Which is where communities get together and they'll put in money into a pool, and then that pool will be distributed by different families across the year, right? So everyone puts in $100, it pools into 1,000, and then the first month, the $1,000
this family,
that gets transferred. This is a really big model, especially in North African cultures, in some Middle Eastern cultures, in sub-Saharan African cultures, in some countries in East Asia. I'm not so sure about Latin America or South America. And this is a really viable model. But when we see communities who come from those cultures come here and still implement the Roscoe model, they're doing it on pen and paper. And they're doing it and they're transferring funds and taking the cash and transferring funds. Okay, well, we know that this is a way that people do loans. This is a way people cover insurances, the products that they might need, help them with childcare, help them with any needs that their family might have, even sending money back home, remittances. This is a huge financial exchange of money that's happening, that's being done on pen or paper, or at best an Excel sheet so people can keep track of it. And financial institutions don't have a service that will address that particular need. And that's why we talk about when we say Canada is very strong historically, but now our cultures, our communities, and our needs are developing and advancing, and we need to move faster to be able to provide solutions that will address those. And that's why we look at countries like Brazil, like Kenya, Hong Kong, like Japan, like not Germany, but like the United Kingdom, that have a variety of financial services. And we're trying to use those as examples to talk to our government and say, stop being happy with what we've done, because this is not going to work for us in 10 years. And we're telling you this now. So yeah.
Perfect point of view. So for I start with the questions, Layial, for inspire our guys here to make more questions for you. So in your point of view, okay, which fintech trends in Canada could inspire your people here or startups from Brazil?
Yeah. Okay. So first and foremost is, like I was just saying before, is like the financial inclusion side of things, right? So I mentioned Roscoe models, I mentioned Islamic financing and Indigenous, but Canada, I gave another example. Canada, again, is also having a huge housing crisis, right? Rent is incredibly expensive. The young people cannot afford to buy homes.
I can tell you this. I
Yeah.
can tell you this.
Yeah, see, the two people from Ontario understand. It's almost impossible, and it shouldn't be the case. Or I don't know, maybe that's a privileged comment, but it shouldn't be the case where you're working and you and your partner are working hard and you're not able to buy a house, or at least be able to afford a trajectory to buy a house. And that's for those who are privileged, who are able to work and be able to have a stable income consistently. But there's lots of different communities that don't have that. So what are fintechs doing to come in and looking at what that looks like and how can they improve it? And this is the trend that I'm really excited about myself. So we have a company called Chexi, one of our alumni companies. And they said, okay, well, a lot of people have to pay rent by cash. So obviously the money they have in their bank account can pay it. What happens if we can now make them do it through their credit card? It gives them an alternative model for how they can pay rent. And it's not just credit cards are perfect, but it just gives them an alternative model. And that is important. And so they built this product where if you want to pay rent, you can pay it through your credit card. And now for those who are good at paying their credit card, now they can get more points, they can leverage that. And for those who sometimes might be stuck and not able to pay, they now have an alternative way to pay their rent for the next month, and it relieves that stress from it. And now what they're trying to do is say, look, if you're using your credit card to pay your rent, they're working on this. Now it can go into your credit history. So now it's an alternative credit history taking that will help you build your credit in Canada, which is huge. We all know in Canada is a credit-based country and community, right? I didn't even get into alternative credit models that some fintechs are trying to do because they've seen it in different countries and come here and they're like, I can't open a credit card. Okay, I can get a Capital One, but I can't open a credit card. I can't then I can't, leverage my mortgages to be able to buy anything. So I'm excited to see the trends where people are challenging the model of how you can build wealth in Canada. That I'm excited to see.
Oh, cool. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we have one more.
I don't know if that's inspired questions for you guys.
I hope so.
Layial, you mentioned about open banking that you don't have in Canada, but as far as you know, BC in Canada is planning something regarding this matter, because here in Brazil, we have a kind of roadmap that our BC is intend to move on open bank. How does it work in Canada? And my first question. And my second question is regarding millennials. So here in Brazil, we have some movements that we have a huge fintech here in Brazil named Nubank, that most of their clients used to be millennials. They don't like the traditional banks because of a relationship that are not as mobile as they are. So how these things happen in Canada?
Yeah. So if I could talk for hours about financial health, I think you got the bigger conversation that's in Canada. So the big joke is when you go to a conference, you hear about artificial intelligence. The second joke is that when you go to a conference, you hear about how open banking is almost going to be here. So in 2018, there has been a lot of pressure from fintechs to the government to say you have to implement an open banking framework. So they said, okay, let's do like a market study, let's do consultations. And now we're in 2025, and where we're at with implementation of open banking is we think we can start a framework for it by next year, and we'll see from there what happens. Now, open banking is going to be regulated on a federal level. So that one is a quick answer to one of your questions, Helio. It is also been assigned to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. So the FCAC is now responsible for open banking framework, which surprised a lot of people because it was, there was other departments on a federal level that were going to be regulating it or even creating the framework that maybe a bit more understand the market. The FCAC understands consumer protection. And so it was an interesting way for our previous government, the Trudeau government, to pass on open banking to an organization that didn't have the same idea of how open banking should be implemented. So we know the government has promised that open banking framework will be coming. There's way that we kind of talk about it because there's open banking, open data, open finance, open data. And so now what a lot of people in the ecosystem are saying is, okay, it's going to take us forever to implement open banking. What if we look at open data or all these different models? And the government is saying, well, actually, if you're going to look at different models, then open banking is incredibly important because it's going to be the footprint for how other models work. So we got to get this one right, which means we got to be slower, we got to be more focused, etc. And it's incredibly, incredibly frustrating for the fintech system. When it comes to millennials, I'll tell you this. If you're not in the fintech ecosystem, I don't know how many of them could tell you what open banking is. I really don't know. I've told my parents about it a couple of times, and every time I mention it, they're like, what is open banking again? So I don't know if consumers are able to understand, okay, this is open banking, and this is why I should be, emailing my MP so that they can email the federal government so that they can push for open banking. I think what consumers are starting to understand, millennials and younger, are starting to understand why can I not give you as a third party my information? Don't I own that data? Can't I give you that access? And I don't think they even have a conversation like that. I think what they say, so in Canada, if you're a finance, this is where it's like a little bit controversial, and I think this is being recorded, so take this with a grain of salt and then verify it yourself. But in Canada, when you have a bank account, the second you give your password out, you technically lose your insurance and protection over that bank account. So if I give my mother my bank account number and password, if any hackers come in and take my money and there's a record of me giving my mother my password, they're going to say, well, you compromised your password, you should have kept it, you're not protected. So, and that's just familial. Now imagine I'm giving my password to a third party, to Wealthsimple, to Coho, you name it, HomeWise, you name the fintech, and I'm giving that password to them because there's no open banking, which means that these apps, in order to offer their services, have to have an aggregator. It becomes challenging. So I think what consumers will start understanding is, why do I lose my protection if I give my password to a different bank, to a different company, when it's my password and my information? And banks are saying, well, you're compromising it because you don't know who this fintech is and you don't know if they're safe or not. And the fintechs are saying, of course we're safe. We're building cybersecurity policies in there. We're building AML in there, putting KYC. We're doing everything your regulations is asking us for. And if you don't want us to use screen scraping, then do open banking so that way all of us are responsible for that protection. It's not just the fintech and the consumer, but it's you as a bank who's also responsible for the protection of that data for the consumer.
Perfect. Really good explanation. My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. I can say now, I'm not in Brazil anymore, but I can say the open banking is really work really well right now in Brazil. You can share information from all the financial institutions and everything. But we know that we have some problems and everything. But I think is the way for give all the services, financial service for everyone. Open banking will be like a mandatory for all the how can I say the banks and everything. So I believe in that. So Loya, so because we are 5 minutes to finish our journey here in this one more cap in our journey in Brazilian startups in Canada, I would like to ask everyone if someone have one more question. If nobody have no questions anymore, I can say to Loya, thank you so much for your share with us your knowledge and all the information. It's a lot of information that you share. For sure, people will ask you more information because in Brazil it's really, I can say, warm environment about fintech. So people wanna come in here to see if they can explore or not this good environment here in Canada. Okay, so thank you again for all the information, and I would like to say thank you for our our sponsors here. Again, ABS, Associação Brasileira de Empresas de Software, a PIT, né, que é o Parque de Inovação e Tecnologia de São José dos Campos, o IPT, que é o Instituto de Pesquisa Tecnológica, a Universidade Fevale, também a Fevale Tech Park, e o Sebrae for Startups. So this journey, we are in the third day, so we have more 2 days. So we invite all of you and the other guys that have a possibility to come today. Tomorrow and Friday, we will have more sections here, a lot of information from startups from Brazil, all the good things that we can do here in Canada because we are heroes in Brazil. So I think we can explore here this environment that I can say to you guys, it's really nice and amazing to be here. So I don't know if Fernando and Elio can want to say something. And Loya, thank you again, okay?
It's my absolute pleasure. And I'm just going to say one quick thing, Marcelo, is I put my email in the chat. So if any of you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. Sometimes I'm slow, but I will answer you. And the other thing is, please do look for us as an organization if you're looking at the Canadian expansion. Like I said, we're free for you guys as founders and we don't take any shares. So it's a safe way for you to be able to expand and see what the market has to offer.
Perfect. You are amazing, Loya. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really been fun to be here.
Yeah, I just would like to thank you, Laia, again, because you're, as Marcelo said, you're amazing. It was really easy talking to you. Thank you very much for your time to be here.
Fernando?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's it. I would like to thank everyone, especially Layial, for her contribution and her involvement. So yeah, we have 2 more days to go on this bootcamp week, so don't miss it out or the other teams. And yeah, if you guys need anything, just keep in touch with us and we can help you. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, and yeah, have a great afternoon.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
See you tomorrow and Friday.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.